I'm Noah Abrams, and welcome to The Days Between, the show where I talk to my friends, people I admire, and people I want to better understand about success, failure, happiness, and misery, as well as all the other elements that make up a life well lived. Along the way, we'll look at mental, spiritual, and physical health, and when life didn't go as planned, the steps they took to get themselves from A to B and beyond. This week, I'm speaking with Jeni Britton. Having grown up with a healthy dose of Roald Dahl and encouragement, Jeni learned to connect with her feelings early on and has dedicated more than half her life to the sensorial art of making ice cream as the founder and chief creative officer of Jeni's Splendid ice creams. Jeni made the choice to become an ice cream maker at a young age, but it was during her time at the Ohio State University where the adventure truly began. Shortly after walking out of an art class her sophomore year, Jeni set up shop at Columbus's North Market, where she would source the ingredients needed to make her signature creations, gaining an education in both flavor and business. While financially unsuccessful, her first foray into entrepreneurialship provided her with experience and perspective, which set the foundation for the success which would follow, including a James Beard Award, a spot on the New York Times bestsellers list, and more than 60 scoop shops across the United States. In the same year, she was named one of Fast Company's most creative people in business. The bottom dropped out, leaving Jeni faced with a crisis she thought would be the end of her company. Inspired by J.R.R. Tolkien and supported by the community she had nurtured since her days at the North Market, Jeni would weather the storm and emerge having experienced a sense of love she says changed her view on everything in the world. During the course of our conversation, we discussed the fellowship model, B Corps, and how she encourages eating ice cream in the winter. It is with a deep sense of hometown pride that I present Jeni Britton on The Days Between. So I'm here in Columbus, Ohio with Jeni Britton. The last time that I specifically remember seeing you was in 2002 at the North Market. And then about 10 years later, I was in Sacramento at a grocery store, and I remember seeing Jeni's pints and telling the person that I was with, this woman, she makes incredible ice cream. She's from my hometown. And probably 4 or 5 years after that, being in Venice, California, and a Jeni's scoop shop was coming in. And again, the same pride. And one of the things that I thought was interesting, and I guess I just took this for granted, is that you're not actually from Columbus.
No, well, I'm originally from Peoria, Illinois, which is so central Illinois to central Ohio. But I actually don't think of Columbus as being the Midwest either, because I'm from Peoria. And because that is really the Midwest, I think of Columbus as being like kind of a crossroads of 3 regions, where you go north and it's Cleveland, that's kind of the Northeast, and then south it's Cincinnati, where you're really in the South by the time you're in Cincinnati. And then Dayton is really the beginning of the Midwest for me. So it is kind of interesting that I have this nuance of the Midwest. And I love the Midwest so much. We have elements, of course, of that here. But yeah, Columbus is very different from Peoria, where I'm originally from.
Well, tell me about growing up in Peoria.
It's a small city. My grandfather worked for the newspaper called the Journal-Star. He worked there forever and ever. I mean, his whole life. He set type back in the day when you were taking tiny little type and, putting it in these little molds and actually printing newspapers that way. Can you imagine how little that type is? And that was what he did for, 30 years or whatever at the Journal-Star. I also had my other set of grandparents. My grandmother was an artist, and my grandfather had been an eye doctor, but he was retired by the time I knew him, and they owned 10 acres of forest land. And that was where I spent most weekends, that or at my other grandparents' house. My other grandmother Betty was another just a sort of classic, amazing grandmother, cooking and making cookies every day and having a little garden out back. So I have these 2 sort of grandparents that kind of led my existence in Peoria, and I loved it very, very much. I loved my my grandparents.
Well, tell me about your grandmother, Enid.
Yeah, Enid. She was the artist. She was an art teacher and an artist. And also, until her 90s, she passed away in her mid-90s a couple years ago, but she was a firecracker. I remember the story that her husband didn't want her to go to Germany to come visit us. My family was in Germany when I was very little, and he forbid her to do it. So she sold his car and went. This is Enid. She just made her world, and she was amazing. She was an artist, and I have some of her art here. She was always thinking through the art perspective. And even when we were in the forest, always gathering materials, always self-reflecting, always thinking about how to make something out of whatever we find in the forest. She was a researcher. We spent 1 year or a couple of years researching some of the native cultures that went through the area, and then actually building a teepee in the style that they did from scratch, and painting the outside of it and really learning about those cultures, which was wonderful. We'd find arrowheads in the woods all the time, and other fossils too. And so we were just always very connected with our, I think, senses in that space. And she taught me how to see the world through that art perspective, which I actually translated into kind of an entrepreneur's perspective over time also. Enid liked to make one thing and then make something different every time. But I actually really loved, from a very young age, to make something and then make it again exactly the same, and then make it again exactly the same. Whether it was baskets or little sweaters that we would knit for dolls. I mean, I just wanted it to be exactly the same as the first one. There was something in that I loved doing, which is where I get take art to entrepreneurship.
Now, is she the one that introduced you to Roald Dahl?
Yes, actually, she used to read that aloud to us when we were kids. And I definitely relate to Roald Dahl because it's very much Enid, this idea that there's no such thing as a grown-up. Or if there is, they're the ones that ruin everything, that kids actually are really smart, and they know more than we give them credit for. And it's the adults that kind of ruin everything, So she was definitely one of those people that I really don't see as ever becoming what I would think of as a responsible adult. Although obviously she had a life, she had raised kids, she was awesome, but she was never one of those people that tried to be anything other than what she naturally was.
And how did you make your way to Columbus?
My mother got a job in Columbus, and she had been in the sort of graphic design world and decided she was going to start selling some of the equipment that they used. So in the 80s, typesetting equipment. So her father had set type in the way that he did it with little wooden blocks or whatever. She is now using massive computers to do this. And so she was recruited by that company to sell those computers. And they were based here in Columbus, or based, I think, in Cincinnati, but they wanted her here. And so she became a salesperson for that company. We all moved out here. My dad actually worked for NCR at the time when they were competing with IBM for personal computers. He was able to transfer here and then work in Dayton, where NCR is actually based.
And did you go to high school here in Columbus?
I did. I went to 3 high schools. I went to London High School, Centerville High School near Dayton, and then I graduated from Upper Arlington High School. I moved, even though we were in Peoria and Columbus, I still moved almost every year to a different school across town, or, an hour away, or whatever it would be. But I moved almost every single year.
And then you went to school at Ohio State.
I did, which is also a funny story, just because I didn't care much for school. I liked doing things. I loved working. I loved making things. I loved exploring. I loved reading. I loved doing all these other things, but I just didn't like school. And I really, really, really have a problem with authority. I mean, I love being inspired by people, but I don't like just following what somebody tells me to do. And I felt like that was what school was about. Now I understand that, well, they do that on purpose because they want you to go work in a business and just keep following directions. I mean, this is all part of our indoctrination into the business world or whatever, but I didn't like it. So I didn't do well. And all of my counselors were pretty adamant that I would never go to college. And I just didn't believe them. I just thought you can do whatever you want. And my grandparents too had always told me, you can do whatever you want in America. You can start where you're at and build anything you can imagine. And I believed that. So I just never believed them. When I applied for Ohio State and they didn't let me in, I just asked them again.
Wait, what's that look like?
I wrote them a letter and I was like, I think you're making a mistake. Maybe you didn't hear me. This is what was going on in high school. I was actually doing a whole bunch of things. I just didn't I actually, it was really cool that I got straight D's and a couple of A's, it was actually a great accomplishment because I was also able to do all of these other things. I was able to work nearly full time. My mother had a baby and she was very anemic and I took care of him. My dad was out of the picture for 16 years. I just told them it's actually pretty great that I was able to do that. And then they let me in.
And what did you study at Ohio State?
Well, Ohio State is such an incredible place. I mean, I think it's 80,000 people or whatever, and they're all doing amazing things. And so when I first got on campus, it was just overwhelming to me. There's anything you could possibly ever want to learn is happening there. And so it was really hard for me to figure out what I wanted to study. I knew it would be something. I knew I wanted to take art, which I did. I took a lot of fine arts. I took art history. But, if there was a class on vampire folklore, I took that too. Or ancient Hellenistic economies, one of the hardest classes I ever took. Lots of classics, anthropology, but I never was on a degree track. So my counselors again at Ohio State were like, this isn't working. Like, you're not getting anywhere, And I was just like, well, to me, this is great. I'm getting just, I don't know, where I want to be or whatever. So I was in this exploration period is the way that I think about it. And all of that stuff came back and was very helpful to me because what happened was I learned how to communicate, connect patterns, looking at history through connecting the patterns of emotion through art history, and even like some literature classes that I was taking, and the power of storytelling through mythology. I took classes on the French Revolution, like graduate level classes, and just seeing how power structures work. It was an amazing education for me. And then I left in the middle of it.
You left what, your sophomore year?
Yeah, I left in the middle of an art class.
Tell me about that.
I had been making ice cream at home, and I was focused on it. Like, I knew I wanted to do it as a business. It was like portfolio week. So I was at school, I was on my bike, but I'd also taken my big portfolio and like all of my art supplies in my, box. And I was in class, and I knew it was a figure drawing class. So they're 3 hours long. Then the model walked in for the day, and she was like my least favorite model. She's really beautiful, very tall, very thin, but she had these angles to her body that I could never get right on paper. And I always like to draw on big paper. And so I liked the other models better. They were so much more fun for me because they were round, and it was like the radius of my arm, you know what I mean? So I really felt like I could get my entire body into drawing it versus having to like sort of focus on these small angles. It was just that it sort of was just like, I don't want to be here. Like, I don't want to be here working out these angles on this beautiful woman, but like, I just can't for 3 hours. And I was sitting at the drawing horse, and everybody else got out their papers, and everybody was drawing, and she was posing and all of that. And I just stood up and like backed away and left everything. I didn't want to make a ruckus. So my portfolio, like my art supplies, I just pretended like I was going to the bathroom. I kind of walked around the outside of the circle toward the door and left and went on my bike and rode home. And I didn't go back. A few months later, I had started a little ice cream shop in the market, and my professor, she found me at the market, and she was like, do you want your portfolio back? And it was literally the best stuff I had ever drawn. It was beautiful illustrations of hands and faces, and they were huge, and I would love to have them now. And I was like, no, I'm good. I've moved on. So there I was at the farmer's market making ice cream every day at that point.
Was it called Jeni's?
It was called Scream Ice Cream.
Tell me more about Scream.
Well, I'd had this idea a few months before that ice cream was this multi-sensory experience, and that you could tell stories through that, and that it was much more exciting and interesting than the ice creams that I grew up with, at least to me. And so I felt like there were a lot of ice cream companies in America, and I'd worked at one, that were sort of backward leaning, which is also fun, that sort of nostalgic American ice cream company. And there's a lot of them across America, and I love those as well. And then there was like Ben & Jerry's, which is Ben & Jerry's. I mean, it's like lots of personality, and I loved them as well. But I thought, like, what about my people? What about like the creative people? What about like people on dates who are younger? Because we don't really go to those old ice cream shops. There really weren't Ben & Jerry's shops that I knew of. And I just felt like, can we make a place where like people will go hang out, have ice cream, and that like tells stories and that connects people? It can be so much more exciting. So I started making ice creams. And it was like within weeks that like everybody in my circle knew me as like the ice cream girl. So everywhere I went, I had to make ice cream. And within a few months from there, I had a friend whose parents gave us a little bit of money, and we started Scream Ice Cream in the farmer's market. And that was really fun. So she had another business, and she worked there, and I was at the shop all day for 4 years and made all the ice creams, helped all the customers, bought everything from the market, which was just so amazing. So then that really began my real education about flavor ingredients.
What did you know about running a business?
Well, I knew about creating value for people. I knew about service because I had worked in a restaurant, and I really loved the power of service to change people, and I saw that. I knew that people love ice cream and were really there as like entertainment, not necessarily because of the ice creams or whatever. Like I knew all those kinds of things, but like in terms of like business, I knew nothing. I knew that if Ben & Jerry's could do it, I could do it. And I had a big vision, but I didn't know anything about finance. I mean, nothing. I knew nothing about literally anything that has to do with actual business.
The North Market, where Scream was based, I grew up going there with my parents. And one of the things that we always enjoyed about going there on Saturdays was there was like the bread guy, the cheese guy, there's that little wine shop, there was the Middle Eastern restaurant. And you just mentioned that you were sourcing all your ingredients from there. And I'm curious what that taught you about community.
I mean, it is the perfect place for an ice cream maker to learn everything I needed to know to do what I'm doing now. First of all, I think the markets are so funny. And it's like this in every city where there's a market. The people who sell whatever they're selling, they like embody what it is that they sell. I mean, the cheese guy kind of weirdly looked like cheese. He had this like broom, mustache and there's like blonde hair and somehow the poultry people kind of embodied that too. And there was just like the wine guy, like he could not have been in any other business in there but the wine shop. It was just his way about him. And so it's really wonderful to see the flavor, if you will. If you look up the word flavor in the dictionary, I love this. It means the essential character of something or someone. So I use this a lot in everything that I do. But I just love that idea of like how many different kinds of people it takes to make a community. And so I definitely learned that everybody has different perspectives and that we work together kind of as like a family. There were like just dynamics between various merchants that were so interesting to follow. At Scream, I made a ton of mistakes. So there was a faction of the market, like all of the super high achieving merchants that like really weren't happy with me. And I like really wanted to make them happy, but I couldn't figure out how. And then there was like the bottom third at the time of the merchants who were like the sort of conspiracy theory kind of people, and they were like embracing me, but like I kind of didn't really want to be with them either. You know what I mean? There's just like dynamics in the market at the time. It's changed a little bit since, but it's interesting. And so I was kind of trying to live up to what the top merchants were doing, and I was watching what they were doing, their display, how they would get there early every day, how they would stay late. It was always about abundance, whereas the merchants that weren't doing as well, there was less abundance in their displays. They were the ones that would put up signs all over their shops, things like don't put your bags on the counter, or don't let your kids touch this, or hands off the whatever, which nobody really reads. It's just off-putting to people, right? And so I was just noticing all of those little things between all of these merchants, and it was an awesome place to learn. I didn't know what I was doing, so I still made a ton of mistakes. But as I continued to come in every day, continued to serve people, continued to watch what they were doing, I slowly began to pick that up.
Do you think at the time you were thinking more like an artist?
Yeah, well, without question, from my shop, I still thought that the idea was that I would come to the market, be inspired by whatever was in the market every day or whatever was going on in my life or in pop culture, and I would make ice creams inspired by that. And then whatever I had that day was what I had, and customers would come down and make those discoveries, and it would be all about what I was doing. It took me a long time to realize that that's not what any of us go to any business for. And so I think that, yes, I was really still thinking like I was performing for people, or people were there to see me and my ideas. And I see a lot of entrepreneurs actually continue to make this mistake too, where it's like we just put ourselves like in there. We're just constantly creating, and it's constant, new, and we don't really create this sort of foundation of what people know us for. And I thought that was a really good idea, that I would be known for constant change, that ice cream is about flavor. And so it's always shifting and always changing. But I actually had to close Scream, take some time off, and then get into reflection mode before I realized that doesn't work.
Was the decision to close Scream a financial one?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, we were kind of hobbling along. I had been working there for 3-4 years. I was really burned out. I mean, I was there every day. I was at the point where I could barely walk into the market again. It had nothing to do with the people or the community or even ice cream. It was just that when you do the same thing over and over and over again, and it's not really working, it's just kind of depleting. And so I was ready to move on. It just didn't seem to be going anywhere. And my business partner wasn't at all interested in the business. So I closed it and thought that I was going to go back to Ohio State and just move on. I thought maybe I would be a teacher or come up with another idea at some other point. But I had seen business now. I had seen what it was like to be like this sort of small sort of entrepreneur. And it was really, really hard. Before I started Scream, I thought you could open your shop, flip over the sign to say open, and people would come. And I think a lot of young entrepreneurs that I talk to now really believe that. I mean, it's an easy thing to think. You see other people doing that. And that is not at all how it is. The hardest thing you'll ever do, your job actually as a founder, as an entrepreneur, is to get someone to walk through your door. Just to get someone to come over to you, whether that's your website or your shop. And I didn't realize that there would be that effort, and I didn't understand it. I didn't know why people weren't just coming over and so excited about everything I was doing.
So what did that time off look like?
I worked at a bakery. I worked back at the bakery. I was a baker that I had worked at in high school, and I was making croissants every day. And I actually worked at a library in the community that we're even in right now. And I had Saturdays off sometimes. And at one point, I remember I was at one of our local coffee shops. I wanted to just stay there the whole Saturday. It was like going to be my entire Saturday. Because back then, you didn't have your phone in your pocket where you could look up all the inspiration that you could ever desire. So on Saturdays, sometimes we would go buy a magazine, or a few, and then go sit at a coffee shop and literally read magazines for like 4 or 5 hours in public. It was like actually really cool. It was something I really miss. And I went there and stood in line. It was busy, and I got up to the front, and they were out of something that I was like excited about getting, this orange scone that I was like really there for. It was like the orange scone, a coffee, and these magazines. And they were out of it. And I thought, but that's like the only reason I'm here. And they didn't care. And I remember thinking like, well, then I'm leaving. So I left. As I walked through the door to leave, it hit me that like that was exactly how I had treated every customer at Scream, because I would make something like salty caramel, and they would go tell all their friends, and they would be so excited about it, and they would come back a week later to get it, and I wouldn't have it because it wouldn't have been something I felt like doing that day. It was like all of a sudden it all hit me all at once. Like the thing that brings you back to a business is what you had last time. You might change your mind when you're there, but that you have to have that, whether it's service or a color of lipstick or a scone or whatever it is, you have to have that. And then from there, you get the opportunity to change people's minds. And that changed everything. Once I started to shift my thinking into, holy cow, like even art is serving people. Like this is really about everybody else and not about me, which sounds so obvious now, but I just had thought it was such a good idea. You know what I mean? It's just like, I thought that's what it was about at Scream.
What was it that made you want to come back and try ice cream again?
I think I connected with ice cream really deeply in my own history, my own love for ice cream. Growing up in the Midwest, that was something we did every Friday. And even like in the winter, we would eat before bed. It was just like something that we always did. I loved the culture of ice cream. I knew that my first job would be in an ice cream shop, and it was. Like, I just have always been connected to it for some reason. And then once I found my way into it and started realizing that it's this multi-sensory experience, and it blooms, and it's sort of poetry as the flavors develop. And once I found my connection with it, it was hard to let go, actually. I mean, I burned out, and I thought I could let it go, but I really couldn't. And so once I found that, like, the key, I guess, in that moment, I was just right back in. And in fact, I was back in a really deep way because I'd had this failure, because I'd been through it. And now I felt like I knew how to do it. And so I immediately started writing a business plan.
And how did that manifest itself?
I decided that I was going to still be able to create new flavors, because that was important. That was an important part of who I was that I couldn't let go of, and what my contribution to the ice cream space was going to be. But when I hit on a flavor that people really loved and really asked for, that it would go into what I started calling like a signature list. And so at Jeni's, I had 2 freezers. One of them was for ice creams that people loved and that I knew people asked for all the time at Scream. So even opening day, I started with the flavors that were the most popular from Scream that I knew people requested all the time, but I didn't always have. And even from day one, it was like, these are our most popular flavors. And then I had another ice cream freezer where I would put things that I was working on or things that I wanted people to try. And so when you would come in, maybe you were there for salty caramel, but you would taste the beetroot with mascarpone and lemon and poppy seeds or whatever. And that would be part of the experience too. Maybe you wouldn't end up with it, but just the taste is enough to be a conversation starter. And then you end up with your old standby, the one that you love the last time you were here. Or maybe I change your mind and you go with the new flavor. And then I learned from that, and then I would move that over into the signature list, and then something would have to fall off. It became this system of signature and then seasonal flavors. And then some of those were just like whim flavors that really changed everything.
And this was in 2002, back at the North Market.
Yeah, almost in the same space, one space over from where I had Scream.
And then in 2004, you created the Jeni's website.
Yeah, well, and I knew that we could ship ice cream. I mean, I knew that we could do that because I had seen it done before. And so the other thing that happened was that it's so funny. Like, I called the New York Times and I was like, excuse me, can I speak to Florence Fabricant, who's the person who writes about all the new stuff in New York? But she had written about a couple of places that I thought were cool. So I was like, well, maybe she wants to write about us. But like, I'm in Columbus, Ohio, thinking the New York Times is like everybody's newspaper. But of course it's not. It's the New York Times. So I called Florence and I was like, hey, I'm just making this really cool ice cream in Columbus, Ohio with these agricultural ingredients. And it's really beautiful. And I thought you might want to know about it. And she said, can I get it in New York? And I was like, well, no. Yes, I get it. Okay. You need to be able to get it. And she's like, well, call me when I can. And I was like, okay, cool. Yeah. So that was also part of this, like, we need a website. And then like we were going to be on the Food Network and it was like, okay, we need a website so that people in New York can get our ice creams because that's how you get media. And so we knew we wanted to do that, but then there was this like scramble to get it done before the Food Network show aired. And it was Roker on the Road and he didn't even come out for it. He sent this like producer and a team. And I remember that day too, because they came in, I had been there like overnight, just getting everything ready. And they came in and I was kind of working or whatever. And the guy was like, such a jerk. He was like, look at me. You will not take another step without telling me for the rest of this day. I mean, it was just like really commanding. And I was like, holy shit. Like, I've never met anybody like this before. Like, he's like this New Yorker producer guy and he was like commanding me and like whatever. And I actually really loved it. I loved him. And I was like, got it. All right, let's go. And I actually thought it was really fun. But for the 1 second, it was like, holy shit, this is a level that I have never played on before. And anyway, so, 8 months later or whatever, we built the website. We actually were throwing a party. Like the whole community came out to watch it at like a local bar, packed bar, and it's the night of the airing. And we were like, we need to put like a governor on like the amount of orders because we simply can't make them from the market. We're going to get like 10,000 orders. So we put a governor at like 250 and we could watch the orders coming in. Like we had the computer set up at the bar or whatever, it airs. We see people on the website or whatever it was. And we got one order. The whole episode only gave us one order, which was really funny. But that order was shipped to number 1 Central Park West. I don't know who it was, but soon after that, we started getting a lot more media.
And then a couple of years later, in 2006, you opened up your first Jeni Scoop Shop in Grandview.
I knew that we wanted to grow. We weren't really ready to do it. It wasn't the choice of ours, really. We had started this website. We were doing really well. We had started working with chefs. That was going really well. And then we learned that you're not allowed to make ice cream in an open air environment in this way. You can serve it over the counter and you're governed by the local health department, just like any restaurant. But as soon as you package it to be resold by someone else, you have to be governed by now the state authorities, the ag department. And that's a whole different thing. Like you have to be certified as a milk processor. You have to have twice monthly inspections. There's a whole bunch of stuff that you have to do. They were wonderful to work with. They gave us like a year to do it, but we had to open another kitchen and our business wasn't big enough to support that. And so we decided that we were going to open our first shop outside of the market. And it was a terrifying year because we took out like, I don't know, I think it was like $150,000 in loans to open the shop and the kitchen. Like it wasn't a ton, but we had to do that and we weren't sure we were going to be able to pay it back. And so it was terrifying. But yeah, so we opened that Grandview location in 2006. And I remember spending $20,000 on the storefront. And
why the storefront?
The storefront had been this like old stucco, one window, one door, kind of aluminum door from like the 70s. Now the whole district is like the oldest shopping district in America. It's got character and this beautiful sort of vibe to it. But somebody had redone this storefront like in the 70s, and it was just stucco and aluminum door. And there had been lots of businesses there, but nobody had thought to do anything with the storefront. I mean, it's expensive to do that. Everybody redid the inside and nobody did the outside. And so I thought, well, if we're going to give this a go, we have to make an offering to the community. And so that was kind of the way that I was seeing it. We may not survive here, but at least the storefront's going to be more in matching the original sort of street. And it's going to look nice. And somebody else will have I was literally like thinking, we're going to make this space like ready for someone, the next person. And maybe by offering this beautiful jewel box seat and the 2 doors, maybe that's inviting to people. And maybe that will make all the difference. And it did. It absolutely did. I mean, I think people saw from the very beginning that we were here to serve people and that it was not about just, again, turning over the open sign and expecting people to come in like the other businesses that had failed in that spot. But instead, we were here to truly serve people through the whole experience.
And were you open year-round or just seasonal?
Year-round and busy year-round. I mean, from day one, it was a line down the block.
People laugh at me. Well, people that aren't from the Midwest will laugh at me when I eat ice cream in the wintertime. And I'm like...
Melt slower.
Yeah, exactly. Just the way it is.
Well, in some of our stores, we've actually put out heaters. We built in heaters above. And we always put out our tables even in the winter. And in this particular store, we would put them out all winter long because I was like, well, if they can eat crepes on some mountain in Aspen or in Switzerland when skiing season is happening, then you can eat ice cream outside in Grandview. Just dress for it and come and do it. And even in some of our stores, we've had heaters, so we can almost like create a summer moment outside of our shop.
So you opened in 2006, and then 2007, Food and Wine asked you for a recipe. You had just had your first child,
Greta.
and you decided to come up with a recipe that people could actually make at home.
Yeah, which was super fun. I was actually really bored because I'd worked so hard, and then I had this baby, and I was at home on maternity leave, and I didn't have anything to do. She was just kind of there. You know what I mean? Like the babies are just sort of boring, in that first year almost. And so I just put her on my back and went to work doing that. But it was also funny because I called my friends at Ohio State. I was like, I don't think I can really do this, but like, let's just try this. I was like, I need your help. We're going to create this master recipe for people at home to make scoopable American scoop shop ice cream, not the creme anglaise stuff, which is delicious in a different way. I want you to be able to like put it in the freezer, harden it, bring it out, and roll it into a ball like you would at a Jeni's or Haagen-Dazs or Ben & Jerry's or any of the great American ice cream shops. So I want you to be able to serve it not just out of the ice cream machine, which is what most that sort of creme anglaise recipe is. Once you freeze it, like I had the experience of making ice creams when I was a kid with my grandmother, and I never really liked it because I always liked Haagen-Dazs better. Everybody told me how great it was going to be, and then it was like icy, or it didn't harden, or when it did, you couldn't scoop it. So I called my friends at Ohio State in the dairy science program, and I was like, let's do this. Like, help me. We're going to figure it out. We can look at this under the microscope. We can figure it out. Like, we can make milk proteins act differently. Let's do this. And they were like, yeah, you really can't. Because like your home freezers, your home ice cream machines, like they can't spin it fast enough. Like no matter what you do, it's always going to be icy at home. So I was like, all right, well then Greta, we're on our own. So I just started doing it. To Food and Wine, I was like, give me like 6 weeks and let me see if I can do something different. And I did. I mean, that was the beginning of what became my book recipe. And it really was. One day I just kind of hit on it after many, just daily, 8 hours a day in my home kitchen. I mean, I had been tweaking the same recipe. I kind of knew what to do with how to cook the milk proteins and make them act like kind of like egg yolks, and then how to add a little more fat and get that right. But I wanted this bouncy ice cream, and then one day there it was. It was this like scoopable, slightly stretchy, rollable ice cream that you could make that was sturdy enough to make into a whole bunch of different flavors. And then that was it. So I gave that to Food and Wine. It was huge. It was like a 3-page spread, and eventually led to the book. But that moment too leads us to copycats, because that was the one. I mean, in 2005, I was in Food and Wine as like a tastemaker, but by 2007, you start to get people ordering our ice creams who 2 years later were going to start their companies.
That recipe came out in 2007. 5 years later, that recipe was part of your first book, which ultimately led to you winning a James Beard Award.
Yeah. This is just all funny to me too, because first of all, to get that book, I had an agent, we were out shopping it. It went to auction, which is kind of rare. And I had people saying to me things like, in New York, they were saying, these editors were saying things to me like, I can't believe this is happening in Columbus, Ohio. I can't believe there isn't an ice cream shop in New York doing this. And I was sort of like, that's actually kind of offensive. But I didn't say that. I was very polite. I'm like, yeah. So a lot of people wanted the book, but I wanted to be with Artisan. I had seen Thomas Keller publish books with Artisan. Artisan is part of a Workman publishing company. They only do 12 cookbooks a year. They were interested. I got along really well with the editor there, but she didn't have the budget that the other publishers had. And so we did something really unusual, and that is that we went to auction and we got like very high bids, but we ended up choosing a much, much lower, almost half the bid, because I wanted to be with a company that would keep it on the shelf for longer. And it was a really smart thing to do. And so we created this book. But I will say, they sort of saw it as a cute project. It was what a lot of people think, that everything I do is sort of this cute little project. They didn't really see it as the James Beard Award winner, the New York Times bestseller, the Wall Street Journal, call it the Ice Cream Bible or whatever. They didn't see it as that. So they gave me completely free reign on it, which was great, right? So I designed the book with these girls that I'd worked with actually at the library, Casey and Joni. They're awesome. Joni was like in school for like, she was studying like, English or whatever. And Casey was studying design. And so we just came together and made this book. And we did all the design work, and we did all the painting and all the illustrations and all the recipes and all the recipe testing and all of that. And they let us do everything we wanted to do, which was super cool. Choose our photographer, who was from Indianapolis. Like, they wanted a New York photographer. And I was like, no. This has to be this sort of Midwestern effort. And then, she was like, these are great people, but still, this is just kind of how people are. She was like, so you're nominated for a James Beard Award. And I was like, yeah, somehow I just had this idea that, like, if we could make a book that was actually useful to people, where it was, yes, my flavors, but really where you could make whatever flavor you wanted to make, you would become the ice cream maker. If I could teach people a sort of easy method to do that, or kids or whatever, that's what people wanted. They didn't want I learned this at Scream. They didn't want the Jeni book of all my flavors that they're going to put on a shelf and just be inspired by it. They wanted the one that they can actually work with to create their own flavors out of their own garden, tell their own stories. And so I sort of knew if we could pull that off, that it would be a popular book. And so when it was nominated, she was like, oh, I just want to let you know, but we'll be there. Like, you don't have to come. We'll be there. We can accept it if you get it. There were these two there was a baking book and a massive chocolate book, also nominated in the same category. And it looked like one of those were going to win, because my book is little. And I was like, are you kidding me? Of course I'm going to be there. She was like, well, you really don't have to. Well, I'm coming. And then, of course, we won. I kind of knew it. Isn't that weird? I just sort of knew it. And then she called and she was like, oh, you made the New York Times bestseller list. And I was like, see, I told you. It's like, you just get these visions and you kind of know when you hit on it. And it's interesting.
How did that feel emotionally to be vindicated by your way of doing things is actually working?
Well, that's funny, because this is the story of my life. When you're a woman in Ohio, a creative, you really have to fight for your space anywhere, for your voice, anywhere you go. You just have to keep going, because no one takes you seriously until, even in high school, it's just like, and then later everybody's like, oh, we knew you were brilliant with, you were amazing. We knew you'd do it. And it's interesting. So, but it's actually the fun part of being me, I feel like, but the truth is too, behind the scenes, every one of these big wins, there are 100 big losses, where I've learned, or even thousands maybe, where I learned. I had to lose Scream to understand what people really want, what I want. I had to go into myself and ask myself, what do I want? And then I was able to create Jeni's, and then I was able to create a book. But it's not something that just came easy. You have to learn how to do it all. But not everybody sees the vision, I think, that sometimes entrepreneurs or artists or creative people have.
In 2013, Jeni's was certified as a B Corp. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, B Corp is a third-party certification. It also can be a legal designation, but we can't get that in Ohio. It doesn't exist in Ohio. So we're certified through the B Lab, which is an organization. So it's kind of like being a lead certified architect. In business, you have a lot of choices of what you do with your customers' money, right? And basically, somebody gives us money for an ice cream cone, and we get to decide what we do with that. And I think the B Lab is kind of here to say, are you using it in a sustainable way? Are you paying people fairly? There's a whole bunch of stuff you can do. And as a company, we've kind of taken on things like sustainability, things like composting, some social issues, being active in our communities, and then paying people fairly, and also buying direct trade ingredients, things like that. And so each one of those things has a number. And the B Lab comes in for weeks every couple of years, and they give you a rating. And so it's been a really cool process. We decided in 2013 we were going to apply just to see if we made it, and we didn't change very much, and we made it. What I love about the B Lab and about this whole movement is that you're not allowed to kind of stay where you're at. You're expected to get better every year, not worse and not the same. I love that, because that's what it's about. Once you commit to this, it's about actually being in it. I will say, outside of the company, there are people who care about it, but it isn't like it's not a marketing play for us. These are dark corners of our company that you'll never see, but the B Lab sees. And that's something that makes me very proud, that we have this third-party certification about the things that we do, where we can't explain that to you over the counter, but it kind of gives us that certification to say, like, well, you can trust us that this is all happening, and that we're also getting better. We're not perfect.
In 2015, Fast Company named you one of business' most creative people.
Oh, that's funny that it was in 2015 too.
What else happened in 2015?
A lot of stuff happened in 2015. I was at the absolute top of my game. Fast Company named me one of the most creative people in business. We did this whole colors collection that was incredible. It was inspired by Matisse at MoMA. MoMA did this big Matisse exhibition. And when I walked into that, like the colors, I mean, I could taste the colors. They were just amazing. So I went back and I did this whole collection based on the actual paint. He didn't mix his paint, so he just used straight from the tube gouache. And so I was getting those and I was creating ice creams that I thought tasted like that. And then we had this whole discussion on color and how color makes you feel. And it was the coolest thing. We were getting tons of attention for it. And then the bottom totally dropped out of the company. We got a call from Lincoln, Nebraska, that one of the local sort of authorities or, like the ag department there or something had done some tests and they found listeria in our ice cream, which is obviously not the call that any company wants to have. And so we immediately, had to sort of scramble to figure out what to do in that situation. But it was a bad moment. Listeria is not something that you want. We didn't know where it was in the company. We didn't know if it was in our kitchen. We didn't know if it was in the rest of the ice creams, like what to do.
When you say what to do, are you being regulated or do you have to make a choice as a company?
Oh, you're very much being regulated. Once that starts to click in, you're being governed. And also you have rights as a company. So we were navigating what is going to be our play. We immediately created a plan to recall everything. I mean, within, I think, 20 hours or whatever of getting this news, we had a plan that we were going to recall everything because we just didn't want to take any chances at all.
So that was a choice. You didn't have to recall.
We did not. Oh, no, we didn't have to. And in fact, there was another ice cream company at the time going through something similar, and they had decided not to recall things, and they were kind of trickling along. We wanted to make sure that we were going to prevent an outbreak if we could. And so we immediately created a plan for that. Was approved. You put your plan forward, you get approved for it, and then you enact it. And in doing that, we did prevent an outbreak, which was massive. Obviously, as an ice cream maker, the last thing on earth that you want to do is make somebody ill. That's not what we're trying to do. In our kitchens, we'd had third-party inspections. Like we were on top of it in the way that we thought was the right way to do it. Now we're like way better at it, obviously. But in that time. So we recalled 265 tons of ice creams, which we sent to an anaerobic digester so that it was like turned into power in Pennsylvania. That felt really good for about 2 seconds. And then we realized that we had no inventory. We were going into summer. We had also burned through all of our cash just trying to get through winter. And this was going to be a difficult thing to survive as a company. And in fact, we didn't think we would, which is kind of interesting too, because when you get to that place, the rules are different.
So what did you do?
Well, we all went to our corners and we fought like hell. We had our CEO working, to just to redo everything in our kitchens with the FDA to work with them and to get it all right. I went over onto my side and I started reformulating the ice creams, trying to figure out, how we were going to make our ice creams if we didn't have a kitchen. And at that point, I started to get calls from nearly every ice cream maker that I knew. I mean, almost all of them in Ohio and even ones outside of Ohio. How can we help you? Use our facilities.
How's that feel?
It was incredible. I think a lot of times as entrepreneurs, for one, but also when we're in crisis, we feel alone. You feel like you're always out on an island and whatever. And you get kind of comfortable there. And then when your community starts to rally around you and you open your eyes for the first time and see and feel that you are not alone, there's no other feeling like that. I mean, people too were like putting, like as if like a prince died or something, like putting flowers at our doors and Post-it notes on our doors to send us good, well wishes, and Facebook and all of those. There were people who were out defending us to people who were saying negative things, but also there was just such a flood of positivity. It was everywhere. And so when these ice cream makers started reaching out, it was just like this sense of love that I'm so grateful to have experienced. It really changed how I think view everything in the world. It was amazing. And so that was what we ended up doing. We ended up working with a 5th generation dairy here in Ohio, who actually was sourcing our dairy for us, some of the grass pasture dairy that we get. They also have an ice cream plant, and it's like state of the art, but they don't use it all day long. They only use it for like one thing. So we're like, wonder if we could actually start working with them. So my job in coming back from the recall was, how do we do this? We've had this very bespoke process, which is very inefficient. Can we actually make better ice creams if we work with their way better equipment, but we have to give up some of these bespoke processes? And so I just kept asking that question with our team. How can this be actually better than what we did before? And it really was.
Looking back on it now, can you trace that community outpouring of support all the way back to the North Market?
100%. I think that people knowing us and knowing me, the only reason I called it Jeni's is because everybody knew me. I didn't want to call it Jeni's. It's just that if I called it something else, people would have been confused because people knew that I was there all the time at Scream. And so because I think people knew me and my intention and that I represented a community of amazing people doing amazing work, there was trust kind of already built in. And then when that community of amazing people started making the right decisions here, when other companies that we've seen in America maybe made the wrong decisions because they were trying to protect the money, we didn't do that. We tried to protect human beings first. When people saw that, it was like the trust was confirmed that we actually are the company that people believed we were, that maybe I am the person that people think I am, and that I represent a whole bunch more people with heart and who sort of are led by love and our values.
I've heard you in other interviews talk about the fellowship model. Can you explain that?
Well, I had to explain at some point. People thought it was like Quaker, and I was like, no, that's awesome. But fellowship is a word that I get from Tolkien, and I love science fiction and fantasy. People ask me what my favorite business books are, and I always say they're the Lord of the Rings movies. I have read The Hobbit, and I've read some of the Lord of the Rings, but those are sort of hard books to actually get through. But the movies were amazing, in my opinion. And it's those kinds of things when we grow up with those images and those stories, and they're hero stories, but they're really not. I mean, when you think about Tolkien, you think about, well, Frodo was the hero. They were all heroes. It was the fellowship. It was how they all worked together in trust. That was the hero of the story, which I loved so much. But it's the same with, Star Wars and, all of this. Everybody kind of plays their part, and it's a lot of trust. They had to be trusting each other that, like, while Frodo was over on mountain doing his thing, that everybody else was protecting him all over, Middle Earth or whatever. But the Fellowship of the Rings, everybody bringing in their awesomeness, their wholeness, their perspective, and then together you make something greater than the sum of its parts. And so when I think about building a company, I actually go back to that daily. That's what I think the whole thing is. And I love the word company because it means you're not alone. It means community, it means fellowship versus the word business. The business is just the process that allow the fellowship to exist. And you have people on your fellowship that are good at those things in their own unique way. But anyway, so fellowship is the thing. And our fellowship is really, and I think every business is like this, every company is like this. It's, yes, our team, and that's a whole bunch of different kinds of specialties, but it's also our customers. We're making flavors and then we're listening to what people say in return. So we put something out and we listen and we tweak it and then we bring it back and then it becomes a signature flavor if they want it to be. So our customers are really a part of who we've become over all these years. So they're a part of that fellowship in a really massive way. But our suppliers are the same. I mean, the same farmers that I was working with at Scream in the market who are my age. And now we're like, we just grew up together and they're still supplying us with strawberries and sweet potatoes and pumpkins and blackberries. And so there really is this whole fellowship thing going on in our company where it's about personalities coming together with their own specific areas. And then together we create something better than any individual person could have.
In 2016, Ohio State gave you an honorary doctorate degree of business administration. You started Jeni's at the North Market in 2002, and here we are 20 years later. How has your view of entrepreneurship changed?
That's so funny, too, because in 2016, when I got that, President Drake, who was the president of the university at the time, we were sitting together in graduation, and we were up on the stage, or it was an arena. We had been talking about jazz, and then he turned to me, and he goes, "So what's your profitability?" And I was like, I have no idea. I mean, even that far into, now I'm 20 years in, when you think of 1996 opening Scream, and now it's 2016, and I'm sitting there getting this honorary doctorate in business, and I'm not sure how to answer, what is your profitability? Like, I'm not even sure right now how to answer that question. And I was thinking, like, are you sure you want to give me this degree in business? Like, couldn't this be like art or dairy science? All of those things exist at Ohio State too. And I thought that was interesting. But I will say, I still think that entrepreneurship is about people and about creating value for people and about passion and love. And those resources, those are resources, passion, love, community, that are far more valuable than money. And in America, at least the people with the money don't agree. That's the difference between entrepreneurship and business in my mind, or building a company versus a business. And I still think the same way. I just think a little differently, I think, than the business schools. I think that, the money and all of that will take care of itself. It'll kind of fall into place if you've got the right people on it and you've got trust and you operate from a place of truly wanting to, what I always say is love, inspire, and activate people. If you really do that well and you've got your fellowship and your amazing team, you're going to be okay. So from my point of view, entrepreneurs, anybody who wants to be a founder, should really focus on getting good at something, falling in love with something that you probably are never going to want to leave. For me, ice cream has always been this amazing challenge, and people. And then you bring in the best, chief financial officer, the best operators, the best people to be in your fellowship, and you build trust.
You left college your sophomore year. You walked away from Scream. What is the value in your experience in knowing when to walk away from something?
Yeah, that's so funny. No, you got to know when to hold them and when to fold them. Right? That song sometimes plays in the back of my head, like literally, because I think that is also a part of the story of my life. I think that you kind of know it. And even once you know it, it takes a while to step into that power. You have a lot of power in the world, but sometimes stepping into it's going to ruffle a lot of feathers, going to make a lot of people in your life confused, unhappy. You have to walk over that minefield. So a lot of us don't step into our power. And when I say power, it's not like at Scream I had anything. I had made $638 a month for 4 years. I had bad credit. I was not in a place to not have a job. But I just knew that I had the power to create my destiny and to do something. And that was what I needed to do. So I just would go back to, if I'm looking back at my life, it's about self-reflection. You just have to listen to yourself and shut down the noise of everybody else, because people will not want you to change whatever it is that you're doing. A lot of times people don't want you to change, or they want you to change when you shouldn't. You should stay the course. And I think getting really good at shutting down your brain, which tells you false information, in my opinion. Your brain is trying to make everything linear, trying to make you fit in, trying to make everything manageable. But actually, that's not good, because your body knows when to fight. And so if you can get into your body and listen to it, and for me, I go to the forest all the time, or I go on a drive, and just listen and try to say, what am I feeling right now? What am I trying to do? Where's my body trying to take me that my brain won't allow? Because it's always the right place. It may not be right immediately, but it always is long-term. And so at some point it starts to feel like, okay, I need to move on. Usually once you get to the place where you know it, it still takes a while, months, sometimes even years, to step into it.
How do you define success?
Time to think, time to experience, time to just be alive, be human, learn. That, to me, that's it. When you can command your time, when you are in charge of your time and what you do with it and what you create with it and how you grow, to me, that's literally what it's all about.
Are you successful on your terms?
Yes, at this point, I believe that. I think I've got some more to do, but yeah, no, I really do, and I spend 2 to 3 hours sometimes in the forest every day. Yesterday, I think I walked 8 miles in the forest. I just like thinking and then doing.
How do you define failure?
It's the process. It's advancement. I don't think that I've ever advanced from a success. It sort of stops you and blinds you, and so when you fail, you learn something. Oh, now I get it. Okay, that doesn't work. And now I know why it doesn't work. So now I can tweak it better.
Can you think of a personal or professional failure that ultimately set you up for success?
Yes. Every success that I've ever had was based on a lot of personal failures and, professional failures. Even when we think about flavors, all of those, but certainly even just in this conversation, just Scream and how it led to Jeni's over time, or how I learned from being 10 years at the market what people are really there for and what people really want by listening, even though some people might have thought, wow, 10 years to get a company off the ground is a long time. In our day and age, that was what I needed to do something new and different in the world and actually to ultimately find success. Like ice cream is a very tricky business to be in, and not very many companies actually get where we are. I mean, if you look at the history of ice cream in America, so it's just constant, it's constant. It's everything from, to people that I've surrounded myself with, things that I now know. I mean, I know that when I was young, I thought that I should always be the creative one and never be the one in charge. And I think that I underestimated my own abilities. And so now I like to tell, emerging entrepreneurs, what you need is, I would say, a coach, an advisor, and an attorney, because you need to learn how to become a leader. You're not born a leader. You have to learn that. And a lot of times entrepreneurs were outside of the system. We didn't grow up in the sort of regular way. We didn't go to, business summer camps every year or whatever it is. We do need to learn how to be leaders and what our power is. So anyway, never underestimating yourself. But I learned through that's what I need. Now that's what I have.
How do you define happiness?
Happiness is, it's over a whole life. And I think I go with the sort of Aristotle's definition or the philosopher's definition of happiness, which is like a life well lived when you look at it in reverse. Did I make the right decisions? Did I, over time, get to where I needed to be? Did I appreciate the things that were my resources, the wind in my sails when I had them? And so I think about that kind of as I'm going forward in my life is like, am I going to be able to say that, later? I do think that, however, I've learned through healing. I mean, when you build a company like this, it's like the greatest adventure ever. But just like Frodo, I mean, you get sort of damaged a little bit along the way, which is what defines it as an adventure. I mean, it's not an adventure unless it hurts. But I've learned through healing that you can get to a place where you feel pretty happy every day. But the way that I've been able to do that is by, again, self-reflection, finding my own path of healing, not trying to live up to somebody's 12-step process or Western therapy or other people's ideals, but to find it within myself who I need to be for me, where it feels good and I feel good. I feel comfortable in the world. And that has taken a lot of forest walking. My coach asked me that when I first got a coach 2 or 3 years ago, he said, the hardest question you'll ever answer is, what do I want? And he's like, so I'm going to ask you that question. And whenever you're ready to answer it, do. And it took me months. What do I want? And in doing that, I also decided that before I can answer that question, I have to answer a first question, which is, how do I want to feel? And I answered that fairly easily. I want to feel peace. I want to feel free. I kind of made that like mental list. And then, okay, well, working back from that, well, then what do I want? And I remembered too, as a kid, there's this story about my grandmother in the kitchen, and she's cooking, and I ran by and she stopped me and she was like, Jeni, stop, look at me. Do you know that you can be anything that you want to be? Anything. Like you can be a doctor or a lawyer, an astronaut, the president. But it wasn't like that for me. You can do anything you want. And I was like, that's cool. Okay. Because everybody had been telling me that. It was the 80s. Like everybody's telling women that. Thanks, Grandma, And she let go, and I ran outside, and I remember when I leapt out the back door thinking like, well, then screw that. I don't want to be like a doctor or whatever. I want to be an ice cream maker. And I thought, in the time it took me to go from her kitchen to the back door, what I really answered was, how do I want to feel? Not what do I want? And I think that I've carried that kind of with me. I want to feel peace. I don't want to feel like I'm driven by work or status or money or material things or whatever. And I can find peace through creativity, through nature, through all of those things, and creating and serving. I've always loved service. I'm just Midwesterner, I think. Anyway, so those two questions, I feel like it's how do I want to feel and what do I want? And those questions really got me on the path.
What would you say to 18-year-old Jeni?
I would tell her to trust her instinct, that your instinct is almost always right. And when it's wrong, it's in the right direction. We are not told that, especially as young people or as women, that's important. I think of instinct too as like atomic patterning. I learned working at the counter every day more than we could ever put in a spreadsheet about patterns of human nature. So that, and I would also tell her to get a coach, get a business advisor, and an attorney as soon as possible. Those are just people that you need around you. You need people to be in entrepreneurship. You need people who are on your side, dedicated to you and your betterment, who are outside of the company, who aren't going to make money from your company. And it's worth the investment.
How would you describe what you do for a living?
Sometimes I just still like ice cream maker, because it's kind of how I think about the whole everything. I mean, the reason that I got into ice cream is this multi-level sort of sensory experience. I mean, I love that it like shocks you awake because it's frozen and you're putting it in your hot body, and from there you start to experience all of the scent and flavor. And I really think of it as like poetry. But there's so much from that. I mean, I think I've written an entire, I write in my notes program on my phone, but I think I've written an entire philosophy just around ice cream. Ice cream is very poetic, but also building a company is poetry. It's efficiency. Creativity is efficiency. The idea of flavor is character. There's just so much around ice cream that I relate to. And for me, it's always about connection. And whether it's connecting with your own self in the moment of actually eating the ice cream, which is a beautiful moment if you're able to get into the moment and be aware of it, or connecting with the person you're with, or if you're alone and in the forest, connecting with what's happening in the forest and all of the sensory experiences there. So there's just so much that I can put through the lens of ice cream, probably also because I've been doing it for 26 years, more than half my life. It's now like the lens through which I see everything.
Jeni Britton, thank you for speaking with me.
Well, thank you so much for being here in my house in Columbus, where you picked up your prom date.
The Days Between is a production of Noah Abrams Studio. Story editing by Andrew Henry. Mixing and mastering by Greg Henkin. Website and design by John Fisher. Theme music is by Evo. The Days Between can be found online at www.thedaysbetweenpodcast.com and on Instagram at The Days Between Podcast. My name is Noah Abrams. Thanks for listening.